Hi there. I'm Leanne Brown, and I just wanted to sort of have my face here quickly, just so that you know what I look like. And I'm just going to start sharing my screen now with my presentation. Go. All right. So, as I said, my name's Leanne Brown. I'm the author of Good and Cheap, a cookbook meant for those on a SNAP budget or food stamps budget. SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, the government program. And the tagline, eat well on $4 a day. The reason for that is because $4 a day is sort of the average that a person who's living on SNAP has to work with. That's where that comes from. It's a reality. It's not like a goal or a good thing or a fun challenge. It's a reality of some 40 million Americans, and actually many, many more. So, well, actually, just before I get to that, I wanted to express, so Good and Cheap, like I said, it's a cookbook. It was my master's thesis project as well for my master's in food studies at NYU. And there's a lot more to it really than budget cooking. And that's kind of what I wanted to share with you all today. Budget cooking, healthy eating on a budget, all of that was and is very much a part of it, very much important to it. But there's a lot more to it that I've learned, especially since sort of putting it out into the world. And that's so much of what I want to share with you all today. This book, this project, what I'm interested in is addressing the many overlapping and interwoven sort of problems. It's designed for those on a SNAP budget, but poverty and economic struggles have roots in so many different forms of injustice. We have racial, social, identity, geographic, environmental, political. There's a problem of access to food. Can you get to a store? Can you get your food home? Can you store it? Do you have enough money to buy it? Do you know how to feed your body well? Do you know how to maximize your nourishment and your enjoyment? These are sort of the many issues that I've been so lucky to learn about and to really become passionate as I've done this work. And so I moved to New York about 10 years ago for the master's program from Canada. And I was drawn to this research, this work, because it's a sticky, enduring problem, poverty in this country, in so many countries. And I always sort of share this slide because it struck me, and it might strike you as well. We think of hunger, I think we don't think of hunger very often because of the sort of the way that the news media sort of works. It's always like, what's new, what's happening, but this is an ongoing crisis. 40 million Americans are on food stamps or SNAP currently, and that doesn't even take into account those who can't quite qualify but might be living on the edge of that, students, people on fixed incomes, people who simply cannot access it for one reason or another, maybe for legal reasons. And I come from Canada, like I said, a country with a whole population of 35 million people. So that's the entire population of Canada sort of living on the equivalent of about $4 a day. So to me, this was just something that I was really, I wanted to take it seriously and sort of look at it and see if there was some way that I could contribute. The reality is it's such a huge, sticky, ongoing problem. And I wanted to contribute in any way that I can. And I knew that I had this sort of wonderful news to offer, which is really that cooking, the ability to sort of put simple foods together yourself, can save so much money, and it can be so empowering and so meaningful as a way to take care of yourself, to take care of your family, and to take care of your community. And it can really, really be healing. And I wanted to share that. And so today I want to share sort of my journey and my experience with learning how to share that good news, because you can't just say it. You can't just download that to people. As I'm sure so many of you know, when any of us are learning a new concept or a new idea, how to cook, how to do any new skill, it requires a trusting relationship to work within. The other thing was, I was trying to create a cookbook, a resource that showed that budget cooking could be really beautiful, really delicious, really fantastic. And I remember when I first told many of my colleagues what I wanted to do, they didn't seem very excited by it. And I think the reason was that when I often say, what do you think of when you think of budget cooking? And the answer is kind of what's on this slide, these very outdated books, the wartime cookbook, this pamphlet, Eat More, Way Less, it sort of is talking down. They think of photocopied stuff in church basements, tuna casserole, hot dogs, things that are not particularly alluring. I do love this one, Not Just a Load of Old Lentils, which is very tongue-in-cheek and funny. But in general, what we're talking about is there's this attitude around budget cooking and around sort of this SNAP program that is this sort of, you should be so lucky. You get what you get and you should be grateful. And there's this implied, you're not grateful. You aren't enough. The shame that is so sort of deep within our culture, and all very often in really well-meaning spaces where people are purporting to be caring in a lot of situations, but shame has been involved, is involved, and is often being carried by so many. And so we have to take that into account. I think it's so, so important. It's really unignorable. So what I wanted to do was create something that was truly welcoming and inviting, and learning what that looked like has taken me a long time. But so I want to talk about trust again, this idea that we learn new things in relationship. This is human, right? Little kids, they have their parents, their grown-ups, who teach them how the world is, how things operate, and they're able to learn, and they're able to learn best, and they're really only able to learn truly when they trust the other person and they believe them. And we don't actually grow out of that ever, right? In order to deliver this message that you can eat healthy on a budget, that cooking can actually be wonderful, that it can be such a good thing in your life. In order to truly deliver that message, people had to trust me. All of us, we have to, when we do this work, even with ourselves, there has to be this element of trust, and sensitivity is essential for connection. And we really, really do need this connection. It's so important sort of not to skip this step. And I noticed, and I really just want to bring this up because I've seen so many incredible, public health initiatives that are trying to sort of express sort of a new idea, something that can be really helpful, and they don't necessarily have great results often, I think, because there is this step skipping that happens where there's no developed relationship and there isn't trust that has been engendered. There's just this sort of desire to download the information into the person and you go off and do your thing. And that's not how human beings really work. And I think that it's vital for us to take that really, really seriously and respect that. So I wanted to talk about, how can we show people that how can we show others, how can we show ourselves that we understand how difficult it really can be to cook and feed ourselves? And especially, I think many of you were talking about working with people who are about to have children, or who already have children, when we're talking about feeding ourselves and feeding others, it becomes even more complicated. And so I have this little comic, this little Calvin and Hobbes comic, where Calvin is saying, shouting to his parent in the other room, "How's my peanut butter sandwich coming? You're using chunky peanut butter, right? I won't eat smooth. Make it open faced sandwich too. Don't put any jelly on it or anything. And use some normal bread. I don't like those weird grain breads. Did you cut it diagonally? I like triangles better than rectangles. So be sure to cut it right." And then mom comes in and says, "Your Majesty's sandwich." He said, "Hey, this is closed face, horizontally cut, smooth peanut butter sandwich on weird bread and with jelly. Weren't you listening?" And I love this comic. It's hilarious. And it just sort of shows, this can be, the sort of war between parent and child around food is real. Unfortunately, we're human. Children can be hard work to feed, not just simply the sort of unending task of feeding them food, always needing it, their little bodies growing, and the joy that can be, but also that it can be a struggle as well. Children have this need to negotiate and express themselves, and they often do that through food. And that can be sometimes quite difficult to tolerate, and especially when you bring budget, and most every parent wants to feed their children healthy food. Something that I've been sharing lately, I think I'm the parent of a 4-year-old right now. And so a lot of the sort of parents that I'm connected with are going through this period where, 4-year-olds and a little younger, a little older, get really, really what we usually call picky. They get very specific about the food that they eat. And this causes tremendous concern for so many of the parents that I know. And I know it's, a huge thing, and I'm sure you'll all be familiar with it. And so what I've been sharing as a reminder to take some of the pressure off is, I know parents can get so concerned about this, like, oh my gosh, my kid they refuse to eat sort of these good foods. Like, what can I do? I want to feed them healthy. How can I do this? I can't take the fight all the time. I just need them to eat. There's so much worry, so much fear. And what I've been reminding people of is actually that it's just completely normal for kids to be this way, that it is something that they will grow out of, that it is normal, and that it is actually biological. Back millions of years ago, when we were hunting and gathering, we had our children on our back until they were about, 2, 3, and we would feed them as we would be gathering. And then once they were old enough to actually begin going out on their own, this very important instinct kicks in, where they are only going to eat the food that is completely familiar to them, only the food that their parent has given them before. Otherwise, they could accidentally poison themselves. And so this is something that, it's very outdated biology, but it's still within us. And so these children are having this big disgust response often to new foods. And that's just normal. It's like a biological imperative that they're going through. And I don't say this is not to say we give up on feeding them healthy, that we never offer them a cucumber. Of course, we continue to offer these things. We continue to normalize these foods. We continue to show that these are part of the food that we eat. But I think what that also does is help parents realize that it's okay. It's normal. It's not something you need to sort of fight and resist and worry and stress and fear that something is wrong with your child or something is wrong with your parenting. Just to normalize that sort of thing often can take so much of the shame and the fear away. And that's always, what we're trying to do, is just make life easier, right? So I wanted to share, this is a recipe from Good and Cheap. It's for peanut butter and jelly granola bars. And this kind of came out of wanting to create something that was that was sort of easy, especially for parents of younger kids, sort of simple foods, accessible foods. I was looking at what are the foods that are often at a food pantry, at sort of an emergency food place, which of course we don't want. Ideally, we don't want anyone to have to access those, but it's a reality that at the end of the month, many, many people are still needing to access emergency food. And there's almost always oats, there's peanut butter and jelly. And, most people know how to make and are ready to make oatmeal, peanut butter and jelly sandwich. There's a different way to sort of put these together And that is sort of in these bar forms. And so the recipe goes, you take oats, and I usually suggest that you also take sort of the bottom of your other cereal boxes, or check in sort of the back of your pantry, see if there's any like leftover nuts or dried fruit or anything like that that you've sort of forgotten about and can have a second life here. You pour that into a bowl, you mix together peanut butter, your jelly, it can be whatever flavor you prefer. You can talk with your kid about that, and water, and you sort of warm it up and then mix it all together, whisk it together. You pour that over the oats. It glues it all together, press it into a pan, bake it, and very, very simple. You then cut them up and you kind of can have them that day. You can have them for breakfast for the week. You can have them for snacks. It's something that it's a little bit of work now that can make life easier sort of later in the week, which is another sort of way of being helpful. And I found that this is an incredibly popular recipe. I've heard from so many parents in particular who make this often with their kids in mind. And yeah, it's just been really sweet to see the way that people have embraced these kinds of things. So now I want to get into another, again, sort of in building empathy, showing that we understand the other person's perspective, showing that we understand the sort of culture and the fears around cooking that we kind of swim in, like the culture that we swim in. So here is this very silly comic, and I'm just going to go through it with you about this experience of cooking at home when you're not really a very well-seasoned cook. So this little person is sitting at their computer. They see a newscast that says, latest studies indicate that people who eat out a lot have a 99% chance of becoming fatter than a sack of pregnant walruses. Oh, and they're probably going to die, bloated and alone and face down on the floor of some rotten motel off the freeway. So obviously this is overstated, but at the same time, it does speak to, there's really incredible fear mongering around this kind of thing, around the way that it's depicted in the news. So this person goes, oh, okay, I'm going to try cooking something. They dust off their old recipe book. They find a recipe that they want to try. Of course, they have to go to the grocery store because they don't have the things available in their pantry. It's not a simple recipe, despite saying it is. They go and buy these various ingredients. It's extremely expensive. It's time consuming. This person is clearly frustrated and exhausted. And then it turns out that the food is also not delicious. They feel lonely. They miss eating good food with a friend. It's all, of course, this is an epic disaster. All of the bad things have happened at once. Nevertheless, I really understand this experience. And they also have all these leftovers, which they don't want to eat. They go to bed, they wake up the next morning, and of course, having had that experience, they go back to ordering a pizza. Who wouldn't, right? Of course, this makes sense. So I just want to say again, like anytime we push ourselves to learn new skills, we need to have a trusting relationship with someone. And so, for example, like this cookbook that they used, it wasn't being totally honest about the reality, or it wasn't an empathetic cookbook. Let's say, it didn't think about what a person new to cooking needs. They didn't have the guidance that they needed. This person felt very alone throughout the process. And they're going to end up sort of repeating that cycle, understandably. So we can connect by showing awareness. You may live in an area where fresh food access is limited. That's a reality for many, many people. It's so important to show that we understand these types of things before we just start giving advice. You may work long hours and be short on time. That is very, very real. You may be sick or looking after someone who is sick. It can make things more difficult. You may be dealing with high stress and the mental health issues that go along with poverty. How can we talk about these things? How can we make it clear that we understand these things without, of course, stepping on anybody's boundaries, asking anyone to talk about anything they don't feel comfortable with, but just being sensitive, being aware. You may not have stable housing or a place to store food and cook. And then there's eating healthy and on a budget, which it sort of seems, of course, when you're on a budget, you need to eat healthy, all that much, almost more, because you can't, you sort of can't afford to waste sort of the nutrients. But that said, again, we come into this cultural problem, which is that this idea that the healthiest foods seem the most expensive. We think of the most sort of cliched healthy foods. They're, the super expensive green juice that's like twice as much as the already expensive coffee, the $15 salad bowl, these sorts of things. And of course, I think many probably watching this know that that isn't all there is to healthy food at all, not by any stretch of the imagination. But that is an image, I think, that is damaging and can become really, really difficult for people to overcome. And that's sort of where we come in trying to just undo that and be clear and normalize what healthy food really looks like. You may not like a lot of healthy foods. And this, again, is real. And this is, again, I think, something that is so often sort of like, oh, well, it's not hard to give up the foods you love and only eat new foods that you don't particularly like. It is hard. We're creatures of pleasure. I think it's so important, again, to respect. If someone says something is hard for them, believe them and find a way to be helpful rather than being dismissive. That does not, engender trust when we sort of are dismissive of people's concerns. Be welcoming of people's concerns. It's harder to store fresh food, and you can be very afraid of waste when you're on a budget. Of course, we cannot afford to waste. I think, I think of a parent of a small child thinking, I want to buy this. I want to, get broccoli this week. I like it, but my daughter really doesn't. I can't afford to make something for her and for me. How are we going to make this work? Am I going to be, fighting with her all night? Like, that's hard, the healthy foods that you can afford require cooking. That's the truth, right? And often those skills aren't there, or they're not particularly well developed. You might have particular health issues that limit options further, dietary issues. You might have an allergy. Of course, there are so many things. And then there's this other thing, which is that the world of healthy food, the way that it looks is often, it's like diet, it's all mushed together with diet culture and with restriction, with all these sort of no's, all this sense of lack. It's good for you if it doesn't have all these bad things for it, but like, what does it really mean? Why should I eat something just because it doesn't have all these bad things in it? It's so confusing and hard, and it can just feel like, of course you want to reject that kind of thing. Whereas on the other hand, the sort of less healthy foods, let's say, and a burger is like you can have a burger every once in a while. It's really okay. But this is easy to advertise. This is an easy argument. You don't even have to argue. Just put this beautiful burger in front of somebody and they're going to go, yum, that looks good. My salivary glands go off. I have a natural biological reaction to this looks delicious. And for some reason, that's not really what's done around healthy eating. We don't talk about what you can have. There's so much that you can have that's so good. It is not about restriction. Health, truly, the feeling of being healthy is not a neutral feeling. It's a real feeling in your body. I was eating an apple just before this, and I was just thinking about how good it feels as it is in my mouth, as it slips down my throat, as it fills my belly. Truly, my body feels good when I eat healthy food. And now so many of us in this culture are cut off from the way that our body really feels and really responds to things, those subtle messages that our body gives us. But I think we would be so well off noting those kinds of things more often. When we eat something heavier, say like that burger, yes, there's tremendous pleasure initially, but sometimes there really is a lack of pleasure afterwards because the body itself is not, is struggling a bit more to digest, is there can be less pleasant feelings sort of in the aftermath. And if we pay attention to all of those things, I think we can become more motivated and more aware of really how we can allow ourselves to feel good, because that's what healthy eating is about. It's not about punishment. It's a good thing. We'll want to be healthy and we want to feel healthy, most ourselves when we are healthy. And so I think we can celebrate the vegetables more. We can talk more about the good things that there are to eat. We can talk about how you can, drink so much more water. Not you can't have soda, but you can drink more water and you can eat all these lovely vegetables. And, maybe you won't have as much room for some of the other foods that you eat if you eat those things first. This image also brings to mind this story of this woman that I worked with. She came to me when she was moving out on her own for the first time. She had a variety of sort of physical disabilities that meant that she had been living with a caretaker for most of her life, but she was at this point where she was ready to go live on her own. And she was on SNAP, and she felt ready, but also pretty scared, in particular about feeding herself, about the cooking for herself every day aspect of living on her own. But she came across Good and Cheap and had downloaded it and just wanted to write to me to say, thanks, this is encouraging. And we had this lovely back and forth, and I talked to her about like what she could make and asked her to follow up with me when she was in her new space. And she did. And actually right the day after she moved in, and she made this dish, this Mexican street corn, these elotes, which is basically grilled corn with a little bit of mayonnaise, some cheese, a squeeze of lime, a sprinkle of hot pepper. It's just the most lovely bite of food. It is sweet from the corn. It's bursting with freshness and brightness. It's tangy, it's salty, it's really good. So she made this successfully. And she said when she pulled it out of the oven, and she bit into it, she just began to cry. She began to really weep. And she said, I was crying because it was so good. It was so delicious, but also because I was so relieved. I knew everything was going to be okay. That's what that meant. And I remember she also said, and I can't wait to make oatmeal tomorrow morning, which is very sweet and funny, of course. But this means so much to me, and I think it's not unusual. We hold so much around food. It means so much more to us than just the meal. It really means I can survive. I can take care of myself. And it can be so, so empowering to have those types of experiences. And I think and again, I just want to say, I think they can only be had through trust, through honesty. So this is my last sort of really big, lots of words slide. There's so much about cooking that we don't talk about. We think it was like, it's just the time in the kitchen. It's not. It's a whole thing. There's deciding what to eat, which requires decision-making skills, knowing what you want, budgeting, and understanding of what is healthy. It's procuring the raw goods, which requires time, money, physical and mental ability, freedom to move safely in the world, something probably many take for granted. Storing the raw goods takes space, time, knowledge. Preparing the ingredients, knowledge, time, organizational skills, physical and mental ability. Cooking, the equipment, the time, the space, the ability to focus, flexibility, curiosity, interest, physical and mental ability. And then there's also serving and eating, again, kind of coming back to that, thinking about parenting, but also just for ourselves. Relationship management, a sense of fun and aliveness or presence, social skills. Cleaning, attention to detail, diligence, physical and mental ability. And then storing, again, organizational skills, knowledge, equipment, space to store food within a safe, consistent space to call home. We often ask this of people when they do not have so many of these things available to them. And many of us will have to soldier on through that anyway. But again, I say this to bring more empathy to this. I do not think we can ever have too much empathy when it comes to all of these kinds of things. There are reasons that hunger remains such a big problem, that so many people struggle to feed themselves in a healthy way. It's because it's just not that simple. It is not a matter of just reading the pamphlet of education. It's so much deeper than that. And I think we really, really need to take that more seriously as a culture. I have a recipe for popcorn in the book. And the reason for this is, well, one, it was something I was doing all these grocery store tours, and people would talk about snacking and how expensive snacks were all the time, and how much, their kids and they like wanted to be able to enjoy snacks. And so this very simple recipe for popcorn came to me. It's also I wanted to share this because cooking popcorn from kernels rather than in a bag is so much cheaper. It's shockingly cheap. And so it kind of allowed the experience of trying a new thing to be more accessible, even for those who are risk averse, because budget is such an issue. Making fresh popcorn from kernels is so inexpensive that you can actually sort of try a new thing, like adding some cayenne and smoked paprika maybe to it this time, and seeing if you like it or your kid likes it. Try a new flavor without that sort of fear of like, oh my gosh, if we don't like this, we're going to have to just choke it down. It can be a space to explore. And then the other thing is I just wanted to normalize the way we eat. Popcorn, so many people wrote to me and have said, thank you for writing about just eating leftovers on toast and saying that that's okay, and eating popcorn for dinner and saying that's okay, because it made me feel so much better. I was feeling like I was doing something wrong whenever I would do this. I felt so guilty, like not a good grown-up, like whatever it was. I just want to name what that is. It's shame, the shame of doing something wrong. And that when we normalize these sorts of things, when we normalize most 4-year-olds are picky eaters, when we normalize all this stuff, it melts the shame away. And then we can actually address it. And then we can move forward. And then we can learn new things, because shame is the opposite of trust, right? When you're ashamed of something, you can't talk about it. You're so afraid of the other person's judgment. Usually it's actually coming from inside, but maybe given to you by someone else, some other terrible experience, some trauma. And when we melt the shame away, good things happen. We build trust, And so, well, I'm trying to think if I want to share one more story. I had this wonderful experience with a woman a few years ago. She wrote to me. She's a grandmother, and yeah, she was a grandmother and is a grandmother, but she's the sole care provider for these children, her 2 kids. And she first wrote to me, they were struggling to make ends meet. They were on SNAP, surviving sort of off of her fixed income. And they found that by the end of almost every month, they were having to go to the food pantry to get emergency food. And they lived in a very small town. And she had identified that she wanted their family to eat in a healthier way, both for herself, her own sort of health issues, and for her children. And the foods that were available at the emergency pantry, sadly, just were not all that healthy. And so she was feeling really out of control about it. Like she couldn't do what she needed. And we worked together for a while, and sort of over time, she ended up planting a garden and developing all these skills, and slowly learning to cook foods in a different way, eating more beans and legumes and vegetables and less meat and all this kind of thing. And over time, things just got better and better. And I remember it was about a year after we'd first spoken that she sent just a sweet, I think it was just like a Valentine's message or something like that. And she gave me an update on the girls and how they were doing. And it was, of course, so touching. And she said, oh, and by the way, I'm off my, my diabetes medication and my heart medication, and I've lost a bunch of weight and I'm just feeling fantastic. And it was actually, it was sort of funny because she buried the lead in some ways, but it also meant to me that it was like, it's great that that happened, but what really mattered was that she was feeling like she was in control of her life, and she was feeling empowered, and she could handle, her life. She was empowered. She felt good about herself. She felt more deeply herself. And I think that's kind of what happens. It's like we focus so much on these, like, oh, somebody like achieved weight loss or something, but it's like, that world, there's a type of poison, to that, the diet industry, and the way that it treats people, the way that it shames people. And I think what's interesting is a lot of the time, the people that we most want to reach, who sort of need these messages most, are the person who have often been so shamed and so damaged by diet industry, or experiences at the SNAP office, or all the sort of shame that has been put upon them. And they are protecting themselves. They don't want to go to that class, that freely available class on how to eat healthy, because they just think, well, I know how people have treated me at those kinds of things in the past and how that's made me feel. And I really respect that. I respect and understand where that person is coming from. They're trying to protect themselves from that kind of toxic shame. And they may be wrong about it. That maybe that situation could be fabulous. But that's a real lived experience, and it needs to be loved away. So I just want to put out, these are my sort of values that I think foster trust, that we've talked about: focusing on pleasure, celebration, beauty, and joy; being practical, having supermarket strategies and groceries for the pantry, sort of lists and ways to, really be genuinely helpful, but that are still open and flexible; having compassion and active listening. I can't tell you how much I've learned from listening and experiencing what others have shared with me, and actually to myself as well, and what it's taught me about how I can show up better for myself and for my own community as well. And the focus on abundance and wellness instead of this lack, instead of restriction and lack. So this is, I just very quickly at the end wanted to share, this is my kind of impact map. This is for every I think I didn't say at the beginning, but for every copy of Good and Cheap that is sold, we donate one, and we also make it available at deep discount for nonprofits that work with sort of the right communities. And we've been able to give away over 350,000, and it's made its way into all these little communities on this map. And it's had just this tremendous impact and this tremendous kind of life. And again, this is not to like feel uncomfortable. It's not to toot my own horn or say like, oh, wow, look at this thing, but more to say, I think it's the attitude of the book, or it's this sort of trust, this relational piece, I think, that allows this to have any kind of impact that it has had, is because of this sort of two-way listening relationship. So just a couple of takeaway thoughts to leave you with, really. What does healthy eating mean to you, really? Do you find there's a difference between the way you define it and the way that some others define it, specifically sort of the overarching society's definition? How important is trust for learning new habits? I think you know how I feel about this, but really I would love for you to think about it for yourself. And what do you think about the shift from a focus on diet and elimination versus wellness and abundance? Okay, so I am going to stop sharing my screen now. If I can figure out how to do that. Oh, I am not sure I can. Stop share. There we go. Hello. So that is all. I just want to say thank you so much for listening and for having me here today. It was a real joy, and I hope you can get something out of that. And thank you so much. I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful day.